Hello, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and not with me today, as he normally is my lifelong friend and co-host Dylan. Instead, I have the pleasure of introducing his debut in front of the microphone. We have Joel. Joel, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It is quite an honor to be here. I'm excited to get down and talk about stuff.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have you on. Joel has been a part of FTF for a while now. We've been working on the background, behind the scenes, to get our YouTube channel up and running. We got some very exciting plans for that coming up, and Joel is spearheading that whole thing, so we're super thrilled to have him involved in that. And a little bit of a movie background for you as well, right?
Yeah, actually, I just got my master's at the very beginning of the pandemic. I graduated for film and television production down in Full Sail in Orlando. So
that's awesome.
Without sounding, too pretentious, I would definitely say the topic for today is something I definitely focus on.
Exactly right. And that's why I'm so thrilled to have you on today. There's a couple reasons, obviously. One, to introduce you to everybody because you've been working hard for us behind the scenes. So happy to have your voice on the show. Two, we're going to be talking about a movie today. And it's a movie that we actually saw together in theaters not that long ago. This was my return to the movie theater, basically. So yeah, that's
a good movie to come back to.
It's very cinematic, and we'll get into that. And then, obviously, your movie background is going to be very insightful as we go into the discussion here. So, yes, by the title, you guys could tell, we are going to be talking about The Green Knight. This is a movie that is in theaters now at the time of this recording. It's by A24, which makes all kinds of, artsy movies.
Art house
films, exactly right. And Joel and I saw this together just a few weeks ago, and I've been, I think, digesting it ever since, trying to understand it. But we're gonna get into that. We'll do a spoiler-free kickoff, just initial reactions, and then we'll get a little bit into the weeds with the story after that. So yeah, I remember Joel walking out of that theater and being like, I'm not sure what I just saw, but I liked it.
Yeah, no, A24 films sometimes have that effect, I've found, and I really appreciate it. If you are going in, and I would say the ads and trailers for the movie very much played it like this is going to be your typical narrative blockbuster experience, and the actual product is very much a meditative journey that the film kind of invites you to partake in along with the protagonist. And so there's definitely a moment, even for me, where I'm walking out kind of almost shell-shocked with awe about what I just saw. So I get it.
Yeah, for me, it was very surprising. I thought going into it, too, I was like, first of all, no one's talking about this. And that just may be like the cinema's going through some times right now, not really in the popular vernacular like it used to be. But even still, I was like, this is a fantasy movie, swords and sorcery kind of thing from the trailer. A24, which I always found to make beautiful looking movies. And we can go through maybe some of the movies that they've made a little later on, but they've made didn't they do Midsummer and The Witch and all that?
They did. Another one that was more recent, but also on I would argue, the same level of art house film would be The Lighthouse that had Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe.
Yes, I saw that too. That was an interesting one as well. So yeah, they have a lot of just what I like about A24 is that usually when I see their movies, they're not trying to just make the next blockbuster. They're just trying to make a unique, put a lot of thought behind the cinematography of a movie, and they're making a movie, art house for sure.
They're very focused on there's two sides. Obviously, there's still a movie studio. They're there to make money, but unlike some of the bigger budget places, they don't do as big a budget for their movies typically. They put out more artsy stuff that has a chance at, a shot at greatness and cinematic history, but at the same time, they go in understanding not every single thing they make is going to be hits, but through how they manage their budgets on a lower operative scale, it allows them to be a lot more creative and risk-taking.
And when I saw they were doing a fantasy piece, I was very conscious going into the movie too. I'm like, fantasy is traditionally so expensive to make, or otherwise it just looks bad. But you could tell that they were doing it on a budget, but everything was still high quality, right? It's like, okay, like our main character is just gonna walk around in the woods for a while. He looks great, and he's in the woods, which just looks like
great.
the woods.
The woods look great.
Yeah.
You've got brilliant cinematography. The lighting's there. Everything seems to be working out. And that's like one of the things I really liked about this film, actually. It was, they were very conscious of, okay, we have, this amount of money. That's not going to stop us from telling our story in as beautiful a way as possible. And they really did nail that, I think. It was, we don't need a huge roster of background actors. We just want to tell the story itself, get straight to the point and do it. And
we don't need these period piece costumes. We don't need large epic battles. We don't need all these special effects. We don't need explosions.
We don't need constant CGI in the background because this story doesn't require that.
Right.
So they put all of their budget where it needed to be so effectively, which is such an underrated thing in appreciating a film. Like this is a solid piece of cinema made on, and it's because of how smart they were with their budget.
Right. And my takeaway from this movie was exactly that. I was like, what a gorgeous movie. And I just love looking at swords and sorcery type stuff. So like the whole time, the story is very like cerebral and loose and not non-existent for a large part of the time.
Almost,
surreal sometimes, absolutely. And goes in so many different directions, and you're like, okay, I don't fully understand what's happening. I don't think I'm supposed to, but I'm enjoying it. And I know that can be like a turnoff for a lot of moviegoers. Is like stuff needs to be happening. I want to follow the story. I'm looking for the action.
Especially if you were like watching a trailer, right? That they have put out that like if you go in never having seen a film like this before, but you saw a trailer that seemed to promise you one thing, I can definitely get how some people might walk out going, what was the point of this?
Oh yeah, like I know some friends, if I took that too, they'd be mad at me because they'd be like, this is so boring, dude. Why did you take me to this? But it's like, come on, like, did you see how like cool it looked and the shot they did and how it like looked different from this and like all the interesting bits of it that you walk away with. Then that like comes to my main criticism, which is like the story in which it's based on, I found to be really loose and a bit too up in the air. I think the director for this movie, David Lowery, who, directed a movie I watched called like A Ghost Story, which is all I need to know about the guy. That movie was like, oh my God. Have you seen that movie, Joel?
I have not.
Oh man.
Not yet.
There's just like a 10-minute scene of a woman on the floor eating a pie for 10 minutes. Nothing else happens, and she eats the whole thing. It's crazy, but it's just like one of those really slow, doesn't matter what's happening, like you just keep watching for some reason. You're compelled to keep watching kind of a movie like this one is. So that for me, and then the whole premise, the whole premise of the movie is the Green Knight crashes, King Arthur's round table and says, oh, whoever inflicts a wound on me, I get to inflict a wound on them next year. And it's like, that's the premise. You chop the Green Knight's head off, and then he gets to chop your head off, and now you're going to go on a journey to get your head chopped off. Like, that part to me never really stuck, but it is the basis of like the original King Arthur like folk tale.
Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is considered like one of the highest pieces of Old English literature, really. It's one of the mainstays of Arthurian legend too. And I mean, I just reread the modern retelling of it, and it's still very much, it's trying to be as faithful as it can while also being, legible to someone who reads modern English.
Right.
And it's not that long a story. It pretty much does, like, that's the main, if manuscripts back in the day had a little backside of the scroll like a book, that's essentially what it would be. That's your plot right there.
Right.
And at the same time, though, I thought it had a lot of subtlety added to it. There was a lot of changes to it.
Yes, a lot of changes.
A lot of liberties, but the core root of events really, I would say, tied everything together in such a strong way. But I do want to point out, because a friend pointed this out to me, and I think it is very interesting, and I gotta say it before I forget.
Yeah, let's hear it.
So they had pointed out, in this entire movie, there are, and I'm just going to pull it up just to make sure I'm quoting them correctly.
All right, getting the sources.
Yeah, so they are Hexwhat on Twitter, HEXX what on Twitter.
Okay.
And we only get the names of 3 characters. Everyone else is referred, like King Arthur is never called King Arthur. It's my king, king, the high king, lord, lady, mother. That's all you get. We get 3 named characters. We get Gawain. We have Essel, which is his love interest in the very beginning of the film.
Right.
And Winifred, Saint Winifred, which is also another character from myth and legend, but also is actually a saint. Okay. She's based on another tale legend from back then. There's a scene where she shows up, and basically we get a very condensed retelling of her myth as well. It's the ghost story, essentially, that happens in the middle of the movie.
Right. The younger woman with the missing head. Gotcha. Yes. Gotcha.
Which I think was a wonderful performance played by, now I'm forgetting names again. She was recently the antagonist in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. If you watch the Han Solo movie, she was the, all of a sudden, reveal at the end, the twist, she wasn't the bad guy. She was actually like trying to start the rebellion.
Oh, interesting.
But yeah, she did a wonderful performance because she does show up again. I wouldn't say it's a reuse of actors. It's a like trying to make note of certain events that happen. So I just thought that was interesting. But yeah, no, there was a really poignant explanation, or no, hang on, sorry, I'm going to reword this. There was a really good point where we only get these 3 characters' names, and of these 3 characters, there is an expectation put on Gawain throughout this entire film. Every character has essentially the same expectation for him of greatness. You're going to become a knight. You are going to become, anyone who's familiar with Sir Gawain in Arthurian legend, like the purest, noblest, most chivalrous knight of the Round Table. And everyone expects that of him. The only people who don't really put that expectation on him is himself, Essel, and Saint Winifred. Saint Winifred, because frankly, it's a ghost story. She has no skin in the game for his overall narrative arc. Essel is someone who actively, in Gawain's mind, is keeping him back from attaining greathood. And then there's Gawain, who is just riddled with his self-doubt. So I just thought that was interesting. This is truly, and it's funny too, because we're missing the first part of the name of this story. This is just called The Green Knight. It's not Sir Gawain in The Green Knight like the original text is. So it's really putting this emphasis on he is not Sir Gawain yet, you know?
Yeah. No, it's true. And like it took me a while after watching the film to unpack like what really was the themes and the symbolism in this movie, and certainly chivalry is one of them. And then this idea of like him learning to be not so guarded, or I guess like, you know, where he wears the green sash, like his like holding on to you know, his like being protected, being guarded, and versus accepting like these greater things about himself. So I was
100%. Yeah.
I was digesting those quite a bit, and I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from this movie is, and this is kind of where I want to wrap up the spoiler-free section, is kind of like, would I recommend this movie? Who's this movie for? I would hesitantly recommend it, and I only say hesitantly because it is a very like dry, artsy movie. Probably drier and artsier than someone would expect going in based off the trailers and the fact that it's in movie theaters, big blockbuster thing release and things like that. So that's the only hesitation I have. But if you're someone who like loves movies for the sake of movies, movie as an art form, art house movies, you definitely gotta go see it for sure. And that's
I will
where I
also chime in.
Yeah.
Even if you're not a fan of those, if you're a big fan of Dev Patel, this movie is for you. There's a lot of eye candy about Dev Patel in there.
And
I'll just put that out.
Fantastic. His performance is so good as Gawain. Is that what we're calling?
That's basically. That's kind of the running joke. No character ever pronounces his name the same way.
Right. And yeah, that's true. He does a brilliant job. All the actors do a really good job in this movie, for sure. But him especially, and he is like 90% of the movie anyway. So the fact that he just rocks the role is, and like you said, absolute eye candy as well. And there's some meat in the bones with acting chops perspective. So yeah, highly recommend for that reason as well. That's a great point. So with that being said, let's get a little bit deeper into some of the like finer details of The Green Knight here. We're going to get into spoilers. I would say I don't know if this movie can really be spoiled, so if you're still interested, you can hang around, but we are not going to hold back on any of the plot points that happen in this movie from here on out. So if you don't want any plot points spoiled for you, turn this down in your headphones now. Man, that's usually what Dylan says. It feels weird to say it myself, but that's where we are. So yeah, here we are. The Green Knight. You know, I love the look of The Green Knight, by the way. I was all in on this movie in the up to like this beginning segment was fantastic. And the Green Knight himself looked incredible. I
mean, just like truly, they knew what they were doing with their budget.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's where
just
the budget
to go back,
yeah.
But like, it wasn't just his look either. The sound design for the Green Knight, not just his voice being this warbly, ethereal, bassy voice. You also had all of his movements. If you're like paying attention, you'll notice it's like hearing the sound in the middle of a forest on a windy day and the trees move. Every time he moved, you heard the creaking of like a tree, or when he like goes to swing his axe, it really does sound like a tree is falling.
It was a great
forest.
Cinematic experience, I'll say. Going back to the movies, this was like the second movie I've seen in the past like 16 months. So
it's been a minute.
It's been a minute. So to be back in the theater and to see something like that, where like you're describing it on the widescreen, get to appreciate all the, you know, on location shots and get to hearing the crunching of the leaves, swinging of the armor, and like riding the horses. It's all there. And this movie moves at a very, you know, the scenes normally are moving at a pretty slow pace. So you just get to like take it all in, and there's a lot to take in And yeah, I thought it was fantastic. And that Green Knight right away, man, like you said, that's where all the money went in terms for special effects, is making the Green Knight shine. And the voice of the Green Knight was super cool.
It was so interesting to me because I've read Sir Gawain and the Green Knight way back in either middle school or high school. I read it in college and then in my bachelor's, and then I just recently read another version of it right before going to see it in theaters. And the most fascinating thing to me is how they portrayed the Green Knight, because a lot of the texts, it's essentially he is a giant hulking figure, taller than any man, but he's a man. He's a dude. And usually it varies from like pulling from Celtic and Welsh folklore, and like he's this giant person, creature, fae folk. But there's also a lot of like hints that linking him to the devil, where it's he rides off to a shower of sparks and a howling laughter that incenses all the dogs, and it's a lot of descriptive poetry, essentially trying to make you go, oh, this is a bad guy. And in this one, it was very much more they went and Green Knight in the old text, because he was oddly clad in all green. He also had green hair, green beard sometimes, but that was it. It was still a human looking person. And this one, they were just like, no, he is an avatar of the earth, of trees and growth, which was personally, like, that's how I always viewed it in my head anyways. So I was just really happy to see that.
Right. No, I agree. And you could tell that there was a lot of consideration of the source material, but then very deliberate changes. It was an interesting kind of compromise, I thought, where when you read more about the story of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight and like how that story goes, and then what we get in this movie, they're quite different. Like, this movie very purposefully is called The Green Knight. There's no Sir Gawain because he's not a knight in the beginning of this movie. Yeah. And learning about what chivalry is and what it means is kind of the whole point of this movie. And by treating the green sash differently and by treating the end of this movie differently, I think it does bring home that meaning of chivalry in a much more clear way, in a much stronger way, at least in terms of like modern storytelling. And I thought it was all for the better. I don't think it needed to be a one-for-one commitment to this original story that we have that may not even be accurate anyway. The story's so old and translated 1,000 times.
Actually, before we go forward, can I just give a brief cover of the original story?
Let's hear it.
So we have a little bit of framework to work off of. So
brilliant.
The idea, usually the way the story is told, is Sir Gawain is already Sir Gawain. He's already King Arthur's right-hand man. Usually this is told from a more French perspective, where Gawain or King Arthur is a little bit less of a hero. He's older, and now he sends out his knights to do things rather than doing things himself. Green Knight shows up, does this whole contest thing. Off he goes. Sir Gawain chops off his head. Green Knight says, cool, find me at this Green Chapel in a year. I'm going to do whatever you did to me, essentially. And at that, it just kind of jumps forward, says Sir Gawain made the most of his life with kind of the thought of death hanging over him the whole time.
Right.
And then eventually, somewhere after summer, he starts on his quest to find the Green Knight. And it's wild because a lot of these stories and the way the manuscript that a lot of these retellings are based off of, it basically just goes, so he went on a lot of adventures during this time, but that's too much to really talk about right now, so I won't. Right. And it then immediately jumps to like the Christmas before he's supposed to meet this knight, and he comes across this castle, meets this lord and lady who just treat him with kindness, and he basically goes through 3 tests of chivalry of not to sleep with this lord's wife while he's out hunting for every 3 days.
Right.
And an exchange is made. Now, this is where the interpretation came in. In chivalry, in tales of chivalry back then, a very common thing. You might also make a connection to modern day, like France,
right,
or European. It's a kiss on the cheek. It's a greeting. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that happens in this tale is basically she keeps trying to essentially throw herself at him, and she keeps kissing him or coercing him into giving her a kiss. And every time he comes back, they made a promise that whatever he gets from the forest, he gives to Gawain, and whatever Gawain gets while he's resting there, he gives to the Lord. Mm-hmm. So every time he returns to the Lord, the kisses from his wife. And at the end of this, he goes off. It's the final day, and he just leaves fully rested and meets the Green Knight. And it's a reveal that the Green Knight is actually the Lord. And the lady usually is Morgan Le Fay, actually. Mm. And it's a test of the most chivalrous knight to see if he is what he says he is.
Right.
And because he stayed true, and the only thing he didn't return on the 3rd day was a sash that the lady gave him to protect him.
Right.
And he nicks his neck. He nicks Sir Gawain on the back of the neck with his axe and says, "That's your punishment. That was the one point where you failed." Gawain returns home wearing the sash, not as a sash, but as kind of wrapped around his arm, mm-hmm. as a way of like, because he is so humble, this is my shame. I must carry this to the end of my days.
Right.
And essentially everyone in the kingdom loves him for it because he is unafraid of displaying his weakness.
Right.
And this story follows those beats, but changes a lot of the narrative.
Yes, it adds a lot of those adventures along the way. This is
mm-hmm.
a 2-hour-plus movie, and I definitely was feeling its length at times, for certain. But it puts those in because it is an adventure story after all. There's a quest involved. When you go on quests, things happen during the quest. So I'm happy that they were all there. And then the interesting part to me was, like you said, when they get to the Lord's house, they have that exchange of like, oh, whatever you get from while you're resting here, you give to me. Like there was some of that. It wasn't
mm-hmm.
It wasn't very strong, and Gawain was not very giving in those moments. He kind of didn't do anything, and that's where the sash was given back. Like he had the sash, then lost it, then got it back again also, which was interesting.
Because in the beginning of the movie, they set up that the Green Knight is not a person. He's created from the magic of his mother. His mother basically...
Right.
Is hinted at as either being Morgan Le Fay or being someone who knows magic, creates the Green Knight, and it's sort of... And she then, after this meeting, gives him a sash saying it will protect him. And it's sort of, kind of like... I read someone named Messifi had basically said, The Green Knight is a movie about being in your late 20s, early 30s, as you struggle to grow up and find the meaning in life in a world that's crumbling around you. But also it's about your mother using dark magic to kick you out of the house or help you find a job.
Exactly. Because he was, Gawain was not being very chivalrous. He was kind of overstaying his welcome at his mom's house. It was like, okay, time to get out of my house and do your own thing. And that became a part of this quest as well, is to learn what it means to be chivalrous and to be
to grow
a noble
into
man.
it.
Yeah, to grow into it. So that was a interesting change that I appreciated, because it gets to the whole point now. You get to, again, and they also think that the mom was like some of the characters in the Lord's house, right? She was the lady of the house, and she was the older lady. She brought the sash back to him. There's all that is speculated that I'm not sure of. And am I mistaken, or was the lady at the Lord's estate at the end, was that the same actress as played the girlfriend in the beginning of the movie?
Essel? Yes. So Essel is this kind of new character, at least to me. She's not mentioned, I don't think, in the original, but he's basically sleeping around with this girl, and her name is Essel, and she loves him dearly, and he's just kind of like in it for fun. And he basically goes to this castle, and he doesn't like recognize her. It's clear that this is a different character, but she's being played by the same actress who played Essel. And this is the lady of the house who keeps trying to seduce him, essentially. And I thought that was a really fun parallel to have an actor play two roles that meant two different things almost. Because you could argue that Essel was not keeping him back, but his reluctance to marry her when she was declaring she was interested in being married to him. So he's being seduced of, I can still be a kid as long as I don't get married. And then all of a sudden there's the flip side. There's this lady of the house that is very much into me, that I very much am attracted to. And it's the same, he sees at least the same person, because this is essentially from his, this story is from his viewpoint.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And this idea of chivalry with these two women plays an important part as well, because this is, at the Lord's house, the sash comes into play because she returns it. And then there is this temptation, like you were describing from the original story, of like, oh, it's not chivalrous to be fooling around with the lady of the manor, right? So even though he was being tempted and he was given the sash, and the sash is explained to have these properties of like, oh, as long as you wear it, you're protected, no one can hurt you. And he clings on to that. And that's one of the things that I was mentioning earlier in the podcast, was when he goes to face the Green Knight, he originally keeps it on. He doesn't give it to the Lord, right? Which is what he was supposed to do. So not very chivalrous of him. And then when he goes to the Green Knight and he's about to get his head chopped off, we get this like, what if scenario that goes through all of these things that he does. You see him go back to, Camelot or whatever, the Round Table, and take over as king. You see him do horrible things to his girlfriend, like basically, ignore her and treat her like she was, nothing. And
well, I mean, I let's go a little more into detail on that, because I think it's really fascinating what they did. Because he not only goes back to the Round Table, essentially, it's kind of implied like he lied. Yeah, no, I just survived. And he, throughout this whole time, he is like, he refuses to take off the sash. It becomes his crutch.
Right.
And there's moments where it's like he has a child with Essel, but she's not a true lady. She's someone lower in the caste, and he has to marry someone else. So instead of doing what would be chivalrous, he takes the child because it's his, and then he marries this vision. In this vision, he marries Saint Winifred.
He also just gives her money, gives his girlfriend like money too, and takes the child and leaves her and never speaks to her again. It was a very intense, callous, non-chivalrous moment.
The entire vision he has of the future, he doesn't smile. And at first, throughout the whole movie, you essentially have a tint of green or something very green prevalent within the frame. And after this moment of cowardice where he doesn't take off the sash and he runs from the Green Knight, and we have this whole vision, he no longer smiles, and it's very clear he is unhappy this entire but he's sure of himself, through his cowardice, to the point where we see through this whole montage, like his son dies in a battle. He marries Guinevere has a child with him. The castle is sieged, and it's essentially like trying to link at, hey, because of him, Camelot falls.
Yeah.
Because of this one instance of cowardice that he's clung onto and let define him. And so she runs away, and the final image of this vision is him pulling the sash out from underneath his robes, almost like he's pulling a dagger out, and then his head falls off, kind of giving off this idea and going back to the theme that the whole movie plays with of death and the inevitability of it, and learning to accept that.
Yeah.
And he's like, I could die that, and it's that moment where he's just like, he comes back to himself and tells the Green Knight, wait, before you actually swing your blow, I need to take off this sash. And it's because he's finally come to terms that he's been battling with this whole movie about, hey, I'm no longer a kid. I can't hold on to the indestructibility mindset that I had while I was a teenager. And also I need to be aware, not only could I die at any time, but if I'm not careful, I could die at any time, and it could not be a good or honorable death.
Right. And I would rather... But I do think, though, what's interesting about this movie is he chooses to face certain death, because he's like, wait, because it's revealed that this whole what if scenario was a what if scenario, and it cuts all the way back. It's a long montage. You see him go back and talk to King Arthur. And
it's like over 25 minutes.
Yeah,
and it really is a montage. There's, I think, the only words you hear throughout those 20 minutes are lyrics sung by a nursemaid helping Essel deliver her child. It's really good performances.
Oh, yeah.
Because the nuance is there where you understand what's happening the whole way through.
Oh, yeah. You know this is very dramatic and dark tidings indeed. And that Gawain is definitely kind of... He's got this much more stern face on. He's very stoic and grim.
He becomes even more guarded than he was in the beginning of the film. Because in the beginning of the film, he's very vulnerable once he's at the court. First, he's like hanging out with all the knights, kind of like, rubbing elbows, trying to like, I'm going to be a knight someday. And then the king would like to speak with you moment happens. And he goes in front of the king, and the king's like, tell me about yourself. Tell me some tales. And he's like, I don't have any. I'm not worthy of anything you think I am. Yeah. And the king just being like, I know you're capable of it, and that's all that matters. But he's too stuck in his mindset of, I'm not worthy. I'm the kid sitting at the adults table. I don't know. I thought that was really powerful to set up motifs for the rest of the film.
Yeah, and it sets up, again, this conscious choice that he has to make that shows that he has changed as a result of the quest, because he finds himself to be at the beginning of this unworthy of chivalry. He's kind of, avoided consequences and lived the easy life and coasted by living with mom and all this other stuff. And he's almost out of peer pressure and the desire to be worthy of sitting at the round table, even challenge the Green Knight and go as far as to cut his head off. It wasn't like, hey, cut my head off. It was whatever wound you do to me, I get to do to you. And so he's like, okay, I fell, you foul beast. Cha, cut his head off. It's like, okay.
Exactly. And that's what's so fantastic about that, because the Green Knight implies you could cut off my head, and he just takes that as the invitation of, okay, so I'm going to do that. Yeah. And it's a really great reversal, because usually in a story, especially old myths, one of the number one things you see is quick wit. Oh, you were so witty, you outwitted the Fae or whatever. Yeah. And in this one, him outwitting, it's very clearly set up. The knights of the round table see him do this and are cheering. And throughout this whole decision process, you see the king and queen just looking on with this stoic sadness, because he made the knightly, heroic, quick-witted decision, but not the wise one. And it's
and not
like
the chivalrous one either.
Exactly. And the king is just like, this, you have signed your death warrant. And while it was brave to do so, in your need to prove yourself, you have doomed yourself.
Exactly. And in doing the unchivalrous thing of this guy's like, hey, take a hit. You go just to cut his head off. It is very extreme as well. But he thought he was being chivalrous because he didn't know. He's like, this is what heroes do. They cut things heads off.
Yeah.
And then so now he's facing the consequences of that. And we talked about how the ending of this movie is deliberately a departure from the original story, because in the ending now we come all the way to time to pay your dues. We saw the what if scenario if he didn't and held on to the sash and was unchivalrous and did not wear his sash humbly. So then he makes a decision, wait, stop. I lied. Here's the sash. And then the Green Knight's like, nice job. Like, you did good. And then it cuts to this ambiguous ending that is heavily implied that he gets his head cut off, essentially.
Well, I actually want to disagree with that. So the Green Knight comes up, lifts his head after he basically comes clean. I had a cheat. I'm disregarding the cheat. Let the blow fall. And the Green Knight lifts his head, takes his finger across him, and says, off with your head. And that's essentially him saying the game is over. To me, that's how I read it. And it also ends so ambiguously, I think, in a satisfying way, because what it's doing is it's like being clear to us, okay, so Gawain does get to go home, but the future's uncertain. But the one thing we can be certain about is he didn't make the mistake that would lead himself, his children, and Camelot into ruin. He's a better man now.
Yes.
That's kind of how I read that situation. It was it was a test, but it was a test to be overcome, not to fall to, if he did the right thing. And him doing the right thing was kind of him realizing, I'm not just doing the right thing for the sake of the right thing. I'm doing the right thing because I understand it will influence me as a person, and it would be better for me to be dead than to, run away, because that will affect me.
Right. Yeah.
So that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the reason they left it to be ambiguous, because it kind of makes you think about these different scenarios. And it's true that, it's possible. I read into it. I was like, he was about to get his head cut off. And I think the fact that he was willing to choose that was his conscious decision. Again, this like proof of this change of character, that he was ready to do the chivalrous thing and also, be responsible for his actions and do the noble, do the right thing, essentially. This idea of going down this path of like accepting responsibility for your consequences. It's part of growing up. It's something that you have to do to become a man, and then to add chivalry into that brings into these also, like life or death scenarios.
Yeah, and to jump back real quick, I mean, with the theme of death, him throwing away the sash is him literally throwing off the crutch that he's been working with of indestructible youth.
Yeah.
He's finally coming to terms with his mortality to such a point where he physically has to remove it from himself.
That's true.
And is all the better for it. Like, that's why I took it as he isn't killed at the end of this. Also because it's set up, this is a test by his mother. She's not in full control. He could fail and die, but the Green Knight saw this as, no, he passed the test. He lives.
That's true. Because there is also these themes of, facing reality, escaping death, things like that, which he's facing the realities of those things as well by giving up the sash. It's like you can't cheat death and live a good, honest life. You can't escape reality and expect to be chivalrous and true. Yeah, so
Exactly.
those are very fascinating themes that come to a head at the end of this when he's literally prepared to give up his life. And by making the end ambiguous, you can almost buy in that he really was accepting death in that moment. He didn't get a pass. We didn't see the pass happen, and it keeps you on that edge. And I do think it's deliberate, and I genuinely think if you ask the director, he'd be like, "Oh, I don't know." You know, it's I feel like I read an interview somewhere where he had filmed an ending where they did cut his head off and then didn't show it. I want to say I read that. I got to check it out. An interview with the director I was reading in my research.
Okay. Well, while we're doing that, another point I wanted to go off of, just, him coasting and kind of living off of the kindness, generosity of family bonds rather than actually trying to make something of himself that you've been talking about. One of the best moments to me is there's basically a scene. It's implied he's hallucinating. It's also kind of implied that this is where he takes a turn and goes into the Fey world, where he comes across a bunch of giants, which really harkens back to old Celtic mythology and of just like, this land was originally the land of giants. And he runs towards them and basically shouts, begging, "Could a weary traveler ride upon your back to my destination?" He's literally trying to hitch a ride off the back of giants so he doesn't have to put in the work.
Right.
And
I forgot about that scene, if I'm being honest with you. I totally remember that was a wild one.
There's a hint of his character growth there. It's not fully developed yet, but there's a hint of it because, at least on a metaphorical level, because the giant actually does indulge him. The giant reaches out to pick him up, but when the giant does, he shies away. He flinches away from it, and the giant backs away like, and then it goes off walking again. And so it's this whole foreshadowing of him like finally accepting that I need to do things myself.
Yeah, that's true. Because there is that whole thing of being raised in a point of privilege and not having your own identity, and the temptation to just continue to stand on the shoulders of these giants, right? And ride that. And like you said, we start to see through his journey, because that was later in his journey as well that he we see some lessons. I have the Lowry interview. It's from Vanity Fair. He said, this is a quote, "I wanted to write an ending where his head gets chopped off, and that's a positive thing. That's a happy ending. He faces his fate bravely, and there's honor and integrity in that. But that doesn't mean that he's dead. He's killed. He received the blow that he was dealt, and all is set right within the universe of the film." And then he goes on to say, if people were to watch a movie in which Dev Patel gets beheaded at the end, they probably would like to leave the theater feeling differently than they do with the more ambiguous version. So they like the idea of pulling meaning out of it by not being certain. So
at the same time, I still stand by my viewpoint, just because of the arguments had in the castle with the Lord and Lady about what the Green Knight represents, which is both life, death, rot, cowardice, etc.
Right.
But at the same time, it's very much all about honor and all about it's the buzzword of the day, chivalry.
Oh yeah.
And but one of the things that conversation they have kind of goes off to a tangent to is, well, are you actually going to die, or should we see you again? Is it just the death of the current you? When we see you again, you will be a different person. Will we embrace this new person, or will we miss the old one? And which I think also is really great foreshadowing for not like saying what's going to happen during his vision, but really set you up to think about that during the vision that he has where everything goes wrong.
I think that's the point of ending it on an ambiguous note. because there's so much to digest and draw from this movie. And I think it all kind of circles around the same things of going on this quest and going through these changes to be a more chivalrous, honorable man. And to know definitively is almost like to just narrow down the scope of what these themes are capable of delivering in this movie. So you make a great case, and who knows? Also, Lowry could probably just be telling Vanity Fair this, and then he's like, "Oh, I was considering chopping his head off," but it's like I was never gonna chop his head off. Like, let's be real.
Art is in the eye of the beholder, of course.
Obviously. Of course. So. Yeah, The Green Knight.
I know this might not be my place to say, but definitely I'd love to read some of the Twitter comments about this episode.
Oh, yeah.
And just see what other people who have seen the movie, their interpretation is. Yeah. And just because I know there's room for a lot of interpretations at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you got to hop on the Twitter thread when we make the episode announcement. That's the best place at Roger. Wrong show. At the FTF podcast with a number 1 at the end. That's our Twitter handle. So when we make the episode announcement, that's where we'll probably talk a lot about the movie. So definitely pop in and check that out because, there's a lot to digest in this movie. And I feel like, Joel, you and I are like the only two people that have, besides, the people we went with, our crew is the only people that have seen this movie. And then the 2 other people in the theater besides our party that were in the theater as well. So I think we're the only ones that have seen this film. No one's ever heard of it that I talk about. So
it's a shame. We got to get more people to watch it.
Yeah. I mean, A24, I'm going to show up usually for what they film, even though I'm not always like a fan and I have to digest it to appreciate it. I always am happy to watch it. I like knowing that what I'm watching is art. I get that vibe when I watch this movie that's like so carefully shot and crafted, and I appreciate that. And yeah, there's some things like I didn't like when they did the segments and they showed the subtitles. I'm like, what is that all about? Like that's such like a indie movie thing to do that I'm like...
It harkens back to the old like manuscripts, the beginning of a manuscript where you've got the first letter is super well and fancy written and the rest of it's just kind of tight scribbles about it.
Yeah, but this was just very dry, like the beginning, the lesson,
very much.
The child.
It kind of felt...
It wasn't on theme of anything.
It very much
to me is like get
broke
rid of
away.
And let's move it on to somewhere else. But it was fine though. It's such a nitpicky thing. I just thought it was odd. And I've seen 1,000 indie movies that do the same thing, and I was like, it just doesn't add to the experience of the movie to me. But whatever. I appreciated any plot that it was willing to tell me. I was appreciative for. I'm like, oh, okay, we're on the thing now. We're doing the thing. That's helpful to know. But yeah, performances were great. Movie is stunning looking, and yeah, if you're a fan of art house movies, like this is a really polished one that I highly recommend.
Oh yeah, gives you a lot of time for relaxing. I know we're kind of getting close to our wrap up, but one thing I want to talk about, I learned about this a while ago in film. In Japan, there is something called ma, which is, if I'm clapping my hands, it would be the sound in between the claps. It's that moment of it's the breath.
Like the anticipation?
In between. Anticipation, but also sort of a moment of reflection, which can be both used for comedy, for drama, for anticipation, for building horror. But it's a moment to give the audience a chance for reflection. And this film really latches onto that and uses it as a tool. And if you pay attention to what you're feeling and thinking about during those moments, because it has these long moments to let your mind almost wander. Don't be afraid of that, and like think or be aware, because every time we had those long drawn out moments, I was always reflecting on something different having to do with the overall story. And I thought that was really cool. So if you're looking for like a way to go into this and you aren't sure, think about that. That might help you get through it a little more easily.
Yeah, and I think just by managing expectations that this is not like a sword fighting movie will help.
Yeah.
Go a long way as well. I wish someone had prepared me for that a little bit more, but I agree. Joel, you're making me want to watch it again. I was like, I don't know if I appreciated it enough the first time, and now I need to see it again. But yeah, super appreciate all your experience on the movie sets coming in to talk about this movie, and your knowledge of the lore of King Arthur as well. I wasn't expecting that, so thank you so much for being so well read.
Well, You're welcome. I mean, I was just excited. I did a little bit of homework. I got to be honest.
Yeah,
but
it paid off, man. Well done. And now we have to figure out what movie we're gonna see next. We saw Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings.
That we did.
Which, depending on how long Dylan's going to be MIA for, we may have to talk about that next. And then we'll have to go see another movie at some point. But
well, I mean, it's always, I think now and forever, it's going to be a pleasure anytime I get to talk about movies, and an honor when I get to come on a podcast and talk about it with some cool people.
Well,
so I mean, you just ring me up and I'll be back.
The honor was all ours. I was like, I gotta fill this date, but Dylan's not going to be here to record. And I was like, wait, I know a guy who's like super knowledgeable about movies, that we went and saw a movie. It's a fantasy movie. Like, let's make it happen. So super thrilled that you were able to come on, make it all work, share your experience. Because if it was just me and Dylan talking about a movie, we don't know what we're talking about. We're like, oh, this was good, that was good. So to have your professional experience to draw on was super appreciative. Anything else, Joel, you'd like to say about either yourself or the movie before we wrap things up for the day?
Well, if you'll give me just a second to plug
away.
I'm happy to be here. I've been it's been such a pleasure getting to know you, because I've finally had the opportunity to actually move up near you. And
yes,
I'm now
we're neighbors
in Atlanta now. Yeah, exactly. And I'm now in Atlanta looking for gig work in film. So if you know anybody, hey, feel free to reach out to me. But besides that, I guess the final thought I have on this film is the going theme should resonate with anyone, and it's just to finally grow up and be wise and to be kind. And so I'll let my last words be that: be kind.
Be kind. Know you're doing the right thing, even if it's gonna hurt. That's even if it kills you. But I don't know if we have to go that strong. But do your best to do the right thing, even if you have to make a few sacrifices to do it, because that is the noble, chivalrous thing to do. So yes, Joel, thank you so much for coming on. It was lovely to have you, and we're looking forward, guys. We're working on some stuff in the background. Hopefully we'll get to show it off in the not too distant future. Joel's doing some great work behind the scenes. And until next time, guys, go forth and conquer, friends.